welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of...
This is Rogers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rogers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivers for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick! Plays it in at the buzzer! That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into the April 12th edition of Gamecock Pod Live. My name is Keith Alsep. I am your host. This is episode number 1198. We've got a great show on tap today. In just a couple of minutes, we will be joined by our good friend from GamecockCentral.com and the hardest working man I know over there, Collyn Taylor. We're going to talk Gamecock Baseball. We're going to talk men's basketball transfer portal. And then we're going to ask Collyn what he is looking for this weekend at the Garnet and Black Spring game set to kick off at 7 p.m. But first, let's dive into your Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines brought to you by Nana's Porch. Nana's Porch is a full-service catering company serving the greater Charlotte area, whether it's banquets, corporate events, weddings, just a big old backyard bash with a whole hog barbecue. They've got you covered. Voted top 3 among all the food trucks in the Charlotte area by the local newspaper, and their pimento cheese, their signature pimento cheese, voted the best cheese product in the meat cheese category, the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association. Check them out at nanasporch.com. All right, Gamecock Baseball cruised last night to a 7-2 win over USC Upstate. That man, mama, there goes that man, Ethan Petrie, continues to just be on a tear. He hits a solo home run, goes 3 for 5, is now hitting .449 with 16 home runs and 52 RBIs. Quite frankly, USC Upstate made it easy after Dylan Brewer and Petrie went back-to-back out of the yard in the first inning. They walked 9 Gamecock batters, 4 of those with the bases loaded. Matthew Becker picks up the win for the Gamecocks. They will head to Nashville for a critical 3-game series against the Vandy boys. We'll be talking to Collyn about that. Gamecock women's basketball making news, and it has nothing to do with players, but South Carolina and Notre Dame's women will open the season Monday, November the 6th in Paris, as in Paris, France. Not Lamont, Paris, not Paris, Texas, but Paris, France. It will mark the first time an NCAA regular season game has taken place on Parisian soil. Notre Dame returns point guard Olivia Miles. Gamecocks will currently will have 10 players on scholarship this summer. I expect that to increase in the transfer portal. By the way, 8 of those 10 players, McDonald's All-Americans, and had Chloe Kitts not skipped her senior season, that would be 9 out of 10 players as McDonald's All-Americans. All right, the Gamecocks and Irish are both multiple-time national champions and both sponsored by Under Armour. So this should be a really big deal. We'll ask Emily Adams if the Greenville News is going to send her over to Paris for that game. All right, you don't want to miss the Garnet and Black Town Hall tonight. If you're not a VIP subscriber, it's not too early to go ahead and get in. My good friend Jamie Bradford will tell you how in just a little bit. But I will be releasing the list of Dawn Staley's top 5 transfer portal priorities based off multiple sources close to the program tonight on the Garnet and Black Town Hall. I'm not just throwing out a list with 15 names on it. Okay. I'm going to give you the 5 major priorities. Count on it. All right. Also, at some point today, Anthony Tank Booker, 6'4", 320 transfer defensive tackle out of Maryland, will make his decision. South Carolina and Arkansas thought to be the favorites because of playing time. But my God, man, why would anybody want to go and be coached by Deke Adams? I know he's a nice guy. Ask Jadeveon Clowney what kind of coach that guy is. Okay, you're not getting better, Tank, if you go play for Deke, the Dekester. All right, so go ahead and jump in the Nana's Porch chat box. Leave your questions for Collyn, Emily, and myself. And while you do that, we will pause for this message, and then hopefully we'll be joined by Collyn Taylor.
If you enjoy listening and watching the Free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Collyn Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock Baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter at KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/Gamecock Pod Daily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, we are back, and we are joined by my good friend of the program from Gamecock Central, Collyn Taylor, fresh off undoubtedly player interviews at the Long Football Operations Facility. Collyn, how you doing? Or are you already on your way to Nashville for Vanderbilt this weekend?
I am great. I'm actually coming from the baseball facility. We just got to talk to Mark Kingston and Will Sanders. So Mike Yuva was our representative over at the Long Football Building. We got to talk to Kingston and Will about just the last week, and then obviously previewing what is expected to be a really fun and hotly contested 3 games up there in Nashville.
No doubt about it. So, Collyn, Gamecocks last night cruised to a victory after back-to-back home runs in the first inning. USC Upstate made it really easy by issuing 4 base-on balls with the bases loaded. So that accounted for 4 runs right there. Unfortunately, I had a JV baseball game. Well, it was actually a varsity baseball game. Austin Independent School District, which is outside of one school, probably the worst high school baseball in the state of Florida, unfortunately, or Texas, unfortunately. But at any rate, I probably shouldn't have said that. I may be in trouble, but it's true. So, 29-4, 9-2 in the Southeastern Conference, and we all had that on our bingo card, right?
Yes. I thought they'd be 33-0 and 11-0 or 12-0 in the league. No, I don't think anyone expected this. Did I think that they'd be much improved from what last year was? Absolutely. On paper, this was a much better team. I didn't know that they'd be this, just given what it was, but they keep answering the bell. The pitching has been, for more often than not, elite. The offense has been exactly what they've needed it to be, which they didn't enter the season needing the offense to be the best offense in the league, but through 11 games, they're top 5 in all 3 slash categories, top 2 in both on base and slugging. So this is a team that has answered every single bell that it's needed to answer. And now you're in the conversation for a top 8 seed. I think things would have to really get bad down the stretch for them not to host a regional in some capacity. So you're talking about a team that is Omaha caliber. They're going to have to navigate some injuries, but this is a team that has shown the ability to go toe-to-toe with LSU and some other really quality NCAA tournament caliber teams.
All right, so let's talk just a second about LSU. I mean, South Carolina just boat raced Skeens, who had been unhittable to the point of the season. Quite frankly, probably should have run ruled them if Cassis doesn't drop that foul pop fly over there by first base, and then the guy hits a 2-run homer. Look, if you had asked anybody, hey, you're only going to get 2 games in versus LSU and you're going to split, I think everybody would have signed up for that, right? But it did kind of leave a bad taste in your mouth a little bit just because you were up 7-3 with 6 outs to get and you couldn't get them.
Yeah, and I mean, that week was an unequivocal success. You beat North Carolina, you blank North Carolina, a team that was top 15 in the country when you played them. Then you go and you get Skeens. You hit 2 home runs. He'd faced 160 batters before that, hadn't given up a home run, and he allowed 2 in in 2 innings, I think it was, or 2 and 3 innings. So the problem is, like, yes, you walk away from those 2 games saying you probably should have won that series and have a claim maybe for best team in the country. So, but what I will say is those players are on scholarship too for LSU, and Gavin Dugas is really good. Cade Beloso is really good. Dylan Cruz is, all of those guys are really talented baseball players. And sometimes talented baseball players get hits. Sometimes they draw walks. The frustrating thing, if you're South Carolina, is Cade Austin just wasn't typical Cade Austin. Labored. I think he went full to the first 3 guys he faced, walked 2 of them, but was on the verge of getting out of the inning before giving up, another hit, and then obviously the grand slam. But it's a South Carolina bullpen that's been, for the most part, elite this year. Has, obviously LSU put up some runs on them, and some of those numbers have gotten skewed because of some the run rule game against Mississippi State affected that a little bit too. But it's a bullpen that the guys you're throwing out there are really good, and it's going to keep you in games more often than not. 10 times, if South Carolina goes into the 8th inning with a 7-3 lead, 10 times, it's probably holding on to that lead 7 or 8 of those, just because of how good that bullpen is. So, but sometimes LSU, their guys are good and put good swings on balls, and it happens sometimes. That's baseball.
That is baseball. You can't go into the 4 corners. You can't just keep running the shot clock down. It's outs. There's no clock, okay, except for the pitch clock and the batter being in the box. That's it. And that is the beauty of baseball, because it's the only sport, team sport, that I know, right, where there's no clock.
Yeah.
You got to get 27 outs to win the game.
Yeah.
Sometimes 24 if you're the home team.
Right.
But South Carolina couldn't do it, but that's okay, because I think everybody is excited about that. And so, look, Ethan Petrie just continues to be on a tear. We're almost to the halfway point of the SEC season. Petrie, 449, 16 homers, 52 RBIs. Look, I don't know. To me, he's got to be the leading candidate for National Freshman of the Year. But if South Carolina continues on its present pace and Petrie continues to annihilate SEC pitching, this is a guy that could be not only SEC Freshman of the Year, he could be the Player of the Year and a candidate for National Player of the Year. Am I overhyping that guy?
I don't think so at all. And Dylan Cruz is really good. Jack, going to butcher his last name, Caglione at Florida is really good. Wyatt Langford's really good. But Ethan Petrie's in the mix. It's probably, I would say those 4 guys right now, when you're looking at Player of the Year in the league, and by proxy, when you're Player of the Year in the SEC, you're going to be in the conversation for Player of the Year nationally. So, yeah, he's in that lead group for Player of the Year, and I don't think there's anyone close right now for Freshman of the Year to hold a candle to him right now. So, you're talking about not only one of the best freshman seasons in program history, because he's on pace to obliterate all of those freshman records, home runs, average, total bases, slugging, RBI, all of it. He's on pace to break all of those records. But you're talking about one of the best freshman seasons ever by a freshman in college baseball. I think the home run record was set last year by Tommy Tanks at NC State, by a freshman. And Ethan Petrie is on pace for, he said it with 27, I believe. Ethan Petrie is currently on pace for 26.7 home runs this year. So you're talking about a freshman easily a top 2 or 3 freshman season in program history, and more than likely, if he goes at his pace, the best freshman season ever, and one of the best freshman seasons ever by a player in Division I NCAA baseball history.
No doubt. So, I mean, the offense also leads the SEC in walks, bases on balls, which is critical for getting guys on base, but it also puts pressure on your pitching staff because your starter and guys in your bullpen are ringing up higher pitch numbers maybe than they are used to. How much of a factor has that been in South Carolina's offensive turnaround?
Huge. It's huge for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the on-base percentage is really good. I think Vanderbilt leads the league in on-base percentage, and South Carolina right behind them. So you're talking about 2 of those offenses obviously squaring off this weekend, but that's the identity of this group. We're going to get on base and set the table for Ethan Petrie, for Gavin Casas, for Braylon Wimmer to get on. I think I looked at the numbers today. This season, the non-top 4 guys in the lineup, so Wimmer, Petrie, Messina, and Casas, everyone else is getting on base, I think, close to a 430 clip. You're getting on base 43% of the time, which is huge, which is what you didn't have last year. So, yes, from just a purely offensive standpoint, yes, you want guys on base. It's a lot better when you're getting 2-run or 3-run homers than just your solo shots. Walk, hit by pitch really helps with that. And then, a guy that typically goes 6 or 7 innings is only going 5 or 6. More often than not, an SEC bullpen is going to have 2, 3, or 4 really good arms. But if you're working those pitch counts, teams are forced to go to guys that haven't been there at times, and you can take advantage of that. And that's a huge thing for South Carolina. You're seeing a lot of late offense. Kingston calls it outlasting opponents. You buy time, whether you're winning or you're right there nip and tuck. You just outlast and outlast and outlast. And at some point, a bullpen arm is going to give up a meatball. And can you put a good swing on it and bust a game open or take a lead? And you've seen South Carolina do that a ton this year. And it's led to the reason why they have 29 wins in 33 games.
No doubt about it. So, all right, what's the latest on the rotation for this weekend? Noah Hall is out. Will Sanders, I thought, had a really good outing against LSU after getting that weekend off to reset. It looked like he's kind of tweaked his windup and his delivery a little bit from the windup. How much confidence do you think he's gained? And then will it be Eli Jones in place of Noah Hall? What's the latest on the rotation this weekend at Vanderbilt?
Yeah, Mark Kingston was pretty non-committal. They said that they'd put that out obviously tomorrow. I would be shocked if it's not Sanders, Mahoney, and then a TBA, which gives them some flexibility. If they need to use an Eli Jones, if they need to use a Matthew Becker to win a game on Friday, Saturday, they can. I think your 2 leading candidates right now to start Game 3 are Jones and Becker, and there are pros and cons to both. Obviously, Becker's been far better as a starter numbers-wise in similar innings compared to him out of the bullpen. Jones has been better as a starter, but not by much. They're very comparable numbers. So you're talking about 2 guys who I think are your leading candidates, who wouldn't be bad options. But I think you're probably, for South Carolina, going into Game 3, regardless of what happens in Game 1 and 2, to say, hey, let's get 4 out of our starter, turn it over to James Hicks to get 2 to 3, and then go Veach, Austin, or some combination of that at the back. Or Becker, Jones, whoever doesn't start, to get something there. But my guess is they'll go TBA on Sunday, and then you'll either see Eli Jones or Matthew Becker pitching in Game 3 up there in Nashville.
All right, so Collyn, not just for rankings national seedings. But for the SEC, for the program, for the confidence of this team, and for recruiting purposes, how big are these next two SEC series at Vanderbilt and then the Florida Gators coming to Founders Park next weekend?
It's huge. I mean, these are starting last week. You have 8 straight league games against teams that are projected national seeds, top 5 teams in the rankings, top 10 teams in the RPI. It's a huge litmus test for this team. And I think South Carolina passed the first one against LSU. You split those 2 games, and now you got to go on the road and do it against what I would consider probably a more well-rounded team than LSU, top to bottom. LSU's high end is better than Vanderbilt's, but I think Vanderbilt's a really well-rounded team. It's huge because if you can navigate this and be 3-3 over these 6 games with, a series win over either one, you feel really good going into the back half of your schedule with 4 series to play for not only your hosting, but your confidence in your resume as a top 8 seed. So with 4 series left to go and then Hoover. So this is huge. These, Nashville, because you can make the case that these are the 2 best pitching staffs in the SEC squaring off. I think you can legitimately make the case for that. How the offense stacks up against that, how the offense stacks up against, a lot of really good left-handed pitching, how the pitching handles an offense that's pretty dynamic from a veteran standpoint. These are 2 huge litmus tests for South Carolina because, outside of Tennessee's meteoric rise, these are the programs that have run the SEC East for the last decade for the most part. And it's a good way to see how you measure up against 2 very entrenched, well-run programs.
Good stuff. All right, Collyn, let's switch gears to men's basketball. Lamont Paris has made 2 portal additions. Mm-hmm. One guy who I think will make an immediate impact as a starter in Talon Cooper, a 6'4" point guard who was top 6 in the NCAA in assists, and he played for a really bad team. And so when you're dropping that many dimes, I think 6.3 assists per game for a bad team, you're making a lot of really good passes. And then Stephen Clark, the 6'8", versatile forward from the Citadel. I think he could be really an ideal 6th man or 7th man, maybe your first forward off the bench to play some 3 and 4. They have been involved and are involved with a number of guys. And so let's start with who do you think are the top 3 or 4 guys that they are in on? I've got a list of guys. Obviously, I'm sure that list is going to start with BJ Mack, 6'8", 250, Charlotte native out of Wofford. What is the latest with him, and how are the Gamecocks stacking up there?
Yeah, it's going to come down to his visits. I mean, that's not breaking news by any stretch, but you're competing with LSU, you're competing with Arkansas and Alabama, and to a degree Iowa for this guy. And Alabama and Arkansas have been the class of the SEC for the last 3 or 4 years since Musselman and Oates got there. And if you're South Carolina, you really sell the playing time, you sell his role in the offense, you sell relationships, because South Carolina's been there the longest, and internally I know the staff feels like they have maybe the best relationship with Mac just because they've been there and they've handled their recruitment since the minute he stepped into the portal. But it's going to take beating in Alabama. It's going to take beating in Arkansas. And, it's one thing to get to the track and get to the starting block, and it's another thing to finish the race. And they're in the middle of the race right now, and it's about now closing it and getting him on board. And he'll come on campus. I can't remember the exact dates, but I think they're getting the next to last visit. And how that goes I think will go a long way in where Mac ends up playing. But he's probably priority number one, if not. He's at one of the biggest priorities, if not the biggest priority in the transfer portal.
Both literally and figuratively at 6'8", 250 pounds. Coffee is for closers.
Yes.
Okay. Lamont Paris and staff need to close the deal on this guy. All right. So some other guys I want to ask you about. 6'10", stretch big, Mustafa Amzil out of Dayton, native of Finland. Evidently, Lamont Paris has a connection to Finland basketball. How hard are they pushing for him? Because I know there are some other big guys out there. Cesar Edwards, of course, is out there. Ali Khalifa from Charlotte is a guy that I really like, a native of Australia, who was second on their team in scoring. He led the team in rebounds, and he had almost 100 assists at 6'11", 230. How could you not want to add that guy to your roster? And then his teammate, which South Carolina has nobody like him, okay, Bryce Williams, who led the team in scoring for almost 14 points per game, yet dude only started 13 out of their 34 games and was second team All-Conference USA. I would love for South Carolina to add those two guys. And so when you stack it up, is South Carolina still involved with all these guys? How hard are they pushing? And then who am I missing?
My brain, because there's so many. The portal, it's one of those things where names come on your radar and go off your radar. They come back on it. It's nonstop. But I can say this. I did speak with Mustafa Amzil, I believe is how you say his name.
Okay.
He's on, I guess, yesterday, and he said he's still seriously considering South Carolina, and he hopes to potentially make a decision within the next week or two. I'll TBD on how South Carolina feels, how hard they're pushing, obviously. Mac, the big name out there, but they want to use Amzil in that 3-4 role, maybe as your starting. You could potentially make the case as a starting 3. They like him in that 3-4 role with Clark maybe coming off the bench, depending on how things shake out. So he's still very much considering South Carolina. He had a great visit, had a lot of really good things to say about it. And Ali Khalifa and Bryce Williams, I know Khalifa's name has come up more in conversations that I've had than Williams has, but I know South Carolina's very interested in Khalifa, and they just need that versatile big that they just didn't really have last year. And you hoped Benjamin Bozeman-Verdonk could turn into that and just never did. And Josh Gray was, a really good rim protector and rebounder, but his offensive game was not step out and shoot a mid-range. It was very much a old school Bill Laimbeer-ish, get in there, muddy up the waters, get some rebounds and putbacks there. So, Khalifa and Amzil are the two big names outside of Mac, big, quite literally bigs, that I've heard the most. And I wouldn't be shocked if they went after maybe another shooter and then probably tried to target a wing in that mix as well that can help stretch the floor a little bit too. And Amzil, I think, would fall into that category.
All right, so what about the two 24 kids who are at the academy over in Finland? I'm probably getting ready to butcher another name here. Morris Ugasuk, 6'4", guard who has offers from Pitt and Syracuse, and then the younger brother of Federico, Oku Federico, 6'9". Are both these guys definitely 24s, or could either or both reclassify depending on how many portal targets South Carolina hits and their options?
Right now, I'm pretty sure both are 24 guys. I think that both could have options to, but I don't know if they want to reclassify. It's one of those situations. So we'll see. I think South Carolina's in a really good spot with both guys coming off their visits. Obviously that staff recruited Fede coming out of Omnia Academy before he went to Pitt. I spoke with both coaches, their coach after the visit, and he raved about what he saw from them. And if you're South Carolina, you feel pretty good about where you stand. I know Morris, I'm just going to call him Morris because he's planning on an announcement April 22nd is what he told me. So in about 10 days. So that recruitment's going to end sooner rather than later. And we'll see, obviously I think South Carolina's in a really good spot with him. So we'll see how both of those shake out. But I think Morris, I've reached out to Oku, but haven't gotten up with him yet to recap the visit. So we'll see what his decision timeline looks like as the summer goes on and what that might be.
Yeah, so kind of like that dude AJ, the linebacker from Utah State who visited South Carolina. It's kind of like Danny Ford. They had this kicker named Donald Igwebuike from Nigeria, and Danny just said, we just call him Donald. So
yeah, I've learned.
We'll stick with Morris.
Yes, Big Morris.
All right, so Collyn, before I let you go, what are 2 or 3 things you're really going to be paying attention to when you get to watch the Garnet and Black spring football game this weekend?
I think it's, kind of like with baseball. It's all focused on the offense until it isn't. So I'm really going to be paying attention to personnel groupings, how the communication goes, where Dowell Loggins is going to be, if he's on the sideline, if he's up in the box. What some of you're not going to get the frills and the exciting, interesting stuff in the spring game, but what does the base look like? How much movement is there? How often are they rotating in personnel groups, and just maybe the identity of the offense? And after that, I want to see what that second defensive line is. Because obviously, I think TJ Sanders and Boogie Huntley are going to take your first team reps there, but does Elijah Davis, does Nick Barrett, does Xavier McLeod, does I'm drawing blanks on some of these other guys, but who's in that second group behind Boogie and behind TJ Sanders? And that might give a little bit of an indicator on who's had a good spring and where they might see the future of that position. After your frontline guys that are Tonka Hemingway, wherever he plays, Boogie Huntley, and TJ Sanders.
All right, so last question before I let you go. So who are maybe, 3, 4, 5 guys, just names of guys that you've heard a lot of buzz about behind the scenes that, is obviously not a Spencer Rattler or a Juice Wells kind of guy?
Josh Simon is someone that has come up a lot as just a football player, understands the game, can make some things happen in space. Trey Knox, from a leadership standpoint, from a just obviously skill set standpoint, he was a 4-star guy that came in as a receiver. But those 2 are big ones. Lenoris, obviously a guy that everyone and their mother has talked about this spring. Stone Blanton has had some good stuff said about him. So I think those are kind of the 4 that you hear a lot about. And I think the staff internally is pretty high. Desmond Ume Ozulu. I think we're just going to call him Big Des, just to make sure, very similar to that. Just maybe not, a dominant force on the edge yet, but you see the talent, you see the length, you see the twitch, and he's got a chance to play as a freshman out of necessity first and foremost, but his skill set too will lend itself to being able to really make an impact probably as a freshman.
All right, Collyn, great stuff as always. Safe travels, and we will look forward to catching up with you down the road.
That works. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right, that was Collyn Taylor, and now we go from Collyn to Emily Adams of the Greenville News. Emily, I'm just going to throw it out there. Are you going to Paris for the season opener in November?
I sure hope so. I mean, I will be doing my best to negotiate that one with the bosses.
Well, hey, it's great to see you. A lot to catch up on. And so let's start with women's basketball. And I just thought it was a magnificent evening for Gamecock women's basketball on Monday. I mean, wow. Not only did these young ladies just look amazing, I mean, the transformation from when they got there as freshmen until now. And Aaliyah and Zaya got the braces off, amazing smiles, beautiful outfits, the hair, everything. And then just the culmination of all the sacrifices, each one with their own unique stories, like Aaliyah Boston, her mom, not even telling her dad, putting her and her sister on a plane at 12 years old to go to Worcester, Massachusetts. I just couldn't imagine doing that to my daughter, and that's probably why my wife wouldn't be able to tell me either, because I'd be like, no effing way. Not just the accolades, but seeing dreams realized. Just talk about how that had to be and how that was on television in real time.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, that moment, with Zaya was obviously like really teary right away. There's that clip circulated of her going to hug Dawn after she had finished all of that sort of pomp and circumstance of the going up on stage and all that. And it was reported that Dawn had told Nneka Ogumike, take care of my baby in LA. And so it's just, I think that really kind of captured it for me. Just, this group really did. I mean, they were recruited by Dawn. They played for Dawn all 4 years. They played together all 4 years. And then, they all got to move on to the next level together. So it was a really special moment for them. And obviously a historic one too. It's, 3 first-rounders is not something that has happened very often. And 5 draftees has only happened 4 times. So, I mean, it just kind of was a fitting end for them, I think.
So from going to Aaliyah to Letitia Ami here, who, after she dunked in that summer AAU game, it just went viral. She became the #1 prospect on all the boards, on all the lists. And then not just one ACL injury she recovers from, only to a few games into her senior year, another ACL injury, which really hampered her development. Her story at South Carolina, coming off the bench all 4 years, she could have transferred and literally started for almost any team in the country. The tragedies within her family during her time at South Carolina. Having a basketball camp in Africa, all the stuff she's done in the community, in the church community in Columbia, and with the Canadian Olympic team.
Yeah, had the Olympic rings on.
Yes,
on the orange carpet too.
Yeah, I mean, she's just always been one of my favorites, and quite frankly, someone I thought who arguably could have the highest ceiling of any player that was drafted, even though we haven't seen it yet. I still think her best basketball is ahead of her, and I think the Atlanta Dream got a steal in her long term at number 8.
Yeah, and I think the Dream is a great landing spot for her. I mean, that's a franchise that is building right now, is kind of, on the upswing, but still has that very young core, is led by Ryan Howard, who was the number 1 overall pick last year, was rookie of the year last year as well. It's a place where she has a really good chance to make the roster. She has a good chance to sort of contribute early on in her career. And I think, it's a good organization to be in developmentally, for the kind of player that she is. And I mean, her physical traits are just so unusual. And I think that's, why she ended up being the second South Carolina player off the board, even though, I mean, she unquestionably was not the best South Carolina player on the board. I mean, her size and her, handle and her ability to defend on the perimeter for her size are really unusual traits, and traits that will translate, I think, really well to the pro level.
And I mean, I got to say, with a 6'4", with a 6'11" wingspan and the ability to take players off the dribble, and in her career, she's shown the propensity to be able to knock down the three-point shot, and her free throw shooting greatly improved. And, for NBA prospects, they really track how well you shoot free throws to project how well you can develop as a three-point shooter. Mm. And so I think she has that going for her as well. And then, man, Zia Cook, she might as well have been on the red carpet at the Oscars, the outfit she had on. I mean, man, wow.
Yeah, I think
incredible.
She was the consensus winner of the carpet.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. Team Cook definitely got that one. I don't know who the designer was. Maybe it was Louis Vuitton. I'm not sure, but it was phenomenal. At any rate, the raw emotion from her, the struggles, the journey at South Carolina, from leading the team as a freshman, then, sophomore, she kind of had the slump, and then she carried South Carolina in that Stanford game, much like she did in the Iowa game.
Yeah.
The junior year, numbers went down. This year, she got off to a great start, then kind of hit a slump, then came back. And it was kind of unexpected for her to be a first-round pick. Personally, I think she will have to transition to being more of a point guard at that level for the Los Angeles Sparks, but evidently an organization that needs guard help, and that outfit will fit right in with the red carpet in Hollywood.
Yeah, I think LA again is a great fit for her, and a roster where she has a good chance to stay on it, just because they're kind of have been going through a bit of a rebuild ever since Candace Parker left a couple of years ago. They're starting over with Kurt Miller as their new head coach. He was formerly with the Connecticut Sun, was just hired this past off season. He obviously, had a couple of really, really good years with the Sun. I think he's a really good coach. So I think that's a good place for a young player to be coming into. And yeah, I mean, I think for Zia, even coming into the draft, she was not really projected as a first rounder by pretty much anyone. I mean, you were seeing her in that 10 to 12 range a little bit, but almost all of it had her going early in the second. And so for her to go at 10, really, not even coming up to the wire of that second round, I think it was a really cool moment for her. I think it was unexpected. And again, going to LA for somebody like Zia, who's been very involved in NIL stuff, like really takes her kind of business side of things very seriously. LA is a great place to be for that, for brand building and for having a fan base that is, invested in the way that LA is in basketball. No doubt. So unfortunately, Bree Beal was the player who slipped
projected as a first-round pick. She goes the last pick of the second round. How much do you think really the poor showing against Iowa, both offensively and defensively, and then defensively, I thought her worst game of the year was against Maryland. How much of that do you think factored into her Aaron Rodgers-like slide?
Yeah, that was really surprising to me, honestly. I was shocked to see like Ashley Jones go above her from Iowa State. Kiana Traylor from Virginia Tech to go above her really surprised me. LaDasia Williams from LSU to go above her really surprised me. I think what Bree does is something that is going to translate so well at the W level. And I do think the tournament hurt her. I really do, because going into the tournament, her stock had been really, really going up quickly. I mean, she was, even coming into the draft, still looked at as a potential top 10 pick. So for her to fall all the way to 24 was really unexpected. But I mean, again, ending up on the Lynx is not a bad place for her. Again, it's a roster that's sort of rebuilding. It's a team that struggled last year. It's a place where she has a good chance to make the roster and to be a contributor very early on. They're coached by Cheryl Revon, obviously, who works with the national team. So it's not a bad landing spot at all for her. But I do think it was definitely, I think, hard to see her, be the last one left in the room there. And I'm just glad she did get to have that moment, that she did go in the second and didn't, fall all the way to the third. And yeah, I think, there's no doubt in my mind that she's going to be successful at the pro level, just because she plays defense and she can shoot threes. And those are like the two biggest things you need to be a situational contributor in the W. If you can do more than that, that's when, you start to elevate. But those two skills are going to make you most rosters.
I mean, for me, I really was not that shocked that she dropped. Like, I thought LA probably should have been the second player drafted. I thought Zaya should have been the next player drafted. I think if you look at the WNBA, they talk about defense, but if you look at Ashley Jones, the player you mentioned from Virginia Tech, a lot of the other players, Abby Myers, etc., Dorka Uhas. I mean, a lot of those players are just very skilled offensively. They can drive, they can shoot. And I think Bree Beal, 1 for 9 against Iowa, and there were like 3 layups that didn't even hit the rim. Okay. And yes, catch and shoot threes are fine, but that's a small sample size. And she's not really shown the ability to be able to pull up off the dribble in the mid-range. And getting to the basket off the dribble is not really a strong suit for her. And I think that's what really affected her when you combine the lack of a well-rounded offensive game with the last 2 defensive performances. And look, I love Bree Beal, and I love her contributions to Gamecock women's basketball, but that just doesn't always translate to the next level, because it is the elite of the elite, whether it's on the men's side or the women's side, and there are great college players that their skill sets don't transfer. I do think she could be a defensive stopper, but I think she's got to really be in the gym with a trainer, really working on developing her all-around offensive game to be able to score at all 3 levels.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what will be interesting with her, to see how the Lynx use her. I mean, if assuming she makes their roster, but I think the biggest thing with Bria is she's shown that she has sort of the capacity for that improvement. I mean, the jump that she made this year from shooting, 24% from three last year to I think 38 this year. I mean, for a senior, who didn't necessarily need to take that jump, she was going to be a starter no matter what. To have that capacity to improve, I think, is a really positive sign for her. And I think it's hard, that those last couple of tournament games are going to leave, a bad taste in people's mouth, because she was so dominant for so much of the year. She had a lot of double-digit scoring games this year. She had games where, she was just running the floor. And then it just didn't come together in the tournament. And, that's what, was on national television. And that's what the scouts were watching more than they were watching South Dakota State in December. So I think she definitely is one who's coming in now with something to prove, I think, more so than the other three.
All right, so Victoria Saxton, the fifth player drafted, first pick of the third round by Indiana. I mean, look, even first round picks are not guaranteed to make the roster, but when you're drafted late second and third round, I mean, Destiny Henderson, she clearly showed last year, it's what you got inside that counts. What are the odds Victoria Saxton can end up sticking with the Indiana Fever?
I mean, I would say they're not great, but they're better in Indiana than they are a lot of places. Honestly, is the reality. I mean, Indiana only has, I think, 4 players on their roster with more than a year of W experience, which is really unusual. It's a very, very young team. It's a very inexperienced team, and they're under a new head coach this year after they fired Marianne Stanley halfway through last year. Or I don't even think she made it halfway. I think she got about 10 games in. So that sort of makes it a little bit dicier where, you have a new coach who kind of might want their draftees in there, might want, the players that they've chosen, the players that they, think fit their system the best compared to, what the organization has been doing over the last 4 years that frankly hasn't worked at all. So I think it's definitely not impossible. I think if there is a roster she's going to make, Indiana is not a bad bet. But I mean, with a player like Aaliyah there, they also drafted LaDasia Williams out of LSU, who's another, post player. It's hard for me to see where she fits on that roster, but yeah, I don't think it's impossible.
So maybe you could say 5.5 Gamecocks drafted because LaDasia Williams started her career at South Carolina.
That's right.
Somebody I really like, somebody very skilled who got tougher, which I thought was what held her back earlier in her career. She would let mistakes affect her mentally. She got mentally tougher. Obviously, she got stronger. But the more minutes she got, the better she got, and quite frankly, was better in some big games than Angel Reese.
Yeah, she had a great tournament. I mean, I think, it was one of those games during the regional. I can't remember which one it was, but I mean, she was like the reason I think it was the Utah game. She
had 20 points. I think in that
she
game
was unstoppable. I mean, just absolutely carried that, and that was a game where everybody was in foul trouble early. That game was called super, super tight, and she was kind of the rock for LSU on the floor. So she's one who was not projected to go nearly that high. She was projected as a third rounder at best, and ended up going mid-second round, which is interesting. It'll be interesting to see kind of what Indiana saw in her that, rose her stock that much that late in the game.
So speaking of officiating, we have to talk about the Iowa game. I mean, clearly, like the one play that really stood out of many, I just thought awful calls and a lot of no calls was Aaliyah Boston probably got fouled 3 times on the play where she's on the left block or on the right block. She's trying to get to the left block. One Iowa player basically has both arms wrapped around one of Aaliyah's arms, tugging at her. She gets through that. Cesano body blocks her like a football block. And so she gets to the block, and then the player who had her by the arm shoves her from behind with both hands, where she has to stumble out to the corner 10, 12 feet off the block to catch the ball. She takes one dribble in and, it was just Cameron Brink, flop city, and Dee Cantner, who I've hailed as the best official in the game. I've lost all respect for her. She calls a charge. That was obviously a flop. Then Aaliyah gets a touch foul, and she's out of the game. And South Carolina's pick and roll defense just went south in a hurry, and Cesano just screened and rolled right to the basket for uncontested after uncontested after uncontested layup. To me, that's really the difference in the game, was Cesano and the officiating.
Yeah, it was bad. The officiating had not been good throughout the tournament. It was particularly bad on Final Four weekend. Obviously, we all watched the Iowa LSU game, which was similarly poorly called. I did not watch Virginia Tech and LSU super closely, obviously, but that one was not called great either. What was weird to me about that game was it was the first time that I had seen South Carolina panic the whole year. As soon as Aaliyah drew that second foul, you could see. We were sitting right behind the bench, all 3 South Carolina beat writers, and
so was I.
The second Aaliyah came off the floor with that second foul, you could tell they were destabilized. Like, something mentally shifted in that moment where, everything that, Dawn had talked about when they played, when Gino had said they don't play basketball, and everything that they, I think, had worried about when Lisa Bluter was talking about it being a bar fight rebounding, all of that came to a head in that moment where it was sort of the worst fears were being realized. And then they just couldn't adjust. Like, they just could never bring it back from that. I didn't think, even when it was close at halftime, even when it was close, down the fourth quarter stretch, they just never looked like themselves in that game. They never looked comfortable. They never looked like they were playing their game. And I think a lot of that was because of the way it was being officiated, and because it was so different from how they had been officiated all year. And B, because,
with the same officials, by the way. Right.
And that was, it was just a really bizarre situation. And again, they played really poorly. And I think a lot of that was mental, because of the way that the first half went.
Well, so I agree. And, maybe Camila Cardoso was not going to be assigned to Cesano, right? Because she
couldn't do anything on that pick and roll anyway. So.
No, she had the bus. You were sitting there. You saw Dawn Staley turn to Fred Shamil and ask the question that was repeatedly asked after every wide open screen and roll. But Zia Cook put them on her back, and they took the lead momentarily, only trailed, I think, by 1 or 3 at half. And then they come out the third quarter. Aaliyah's on the floor, and she immediately picks up a third foul. I think less than a minute into the third quarter. Again, just a bizarre call that was totally a no call. I thought that was the one that just, maybe the apple cart was upset, but that just turned it over, because after that, I thought Aaliyah never seemed sure of herself, because any movement at all, she could be whistled again for another foul. Just plucking stuff out of thin air, quite frankly. And on the other end, Iowa's post players, when they were setting screens, they were body blocking and extending their elbows and arms. None of that was being called. And
well,
I thought,
Caitlin famously does that little push off.
Oh yeah, I've been talking about that for a month. Right.
And that was what was funny in the Iowa LSU game. It was sort of the reverse scenario of what had happened to South Carolina. I mean, she's been getting away with that all year. They haven't called it. And that's, so if you're being called like that all year, that's how you're going to go play the game. I mean, that's just how it is. And so then when they suddenly were calling that early on in the LSU game, they were like, well, it's so hard in that moment to adjust when you are being called a way that you have not been called the whole year. And I think, yeah, Iowa got the other end of that the next night.
So if they call those push-off fouls on Caitlin Clark on Friday instead of Sunday, South Carolina boat races Iowa. I mean, look, if you would have told me South Carolina's getting 20 more field goal attempts, Iowa is only getting 3 live ball offensive rebounds. I mentioned that for a reason. I'll get to it in a second. And Caitlin Clark's only going 5 of 17 from 3. I'm thinking South Carolina's winning, but she was just pushing off. She was getting to the rim on the ball screens. There was no help coming. But I mean, she did hit some haymakers, right? Like South Carolina scored the first 4. They were down 3. They scored the first 4 points of the third quarter. They took the lead. She comes down in transition on the left side of the floor and pulls up from like 28 feet on the move and just drains one.
It's crazy.
The shots she hit were big time,
yeah,
game changer shots. I mean, let's give her credit on that.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. And I said that going into that game was Kayla's going to probably score 30 points. Like, that she scored 40, so it was a little off. But, I mean, no part of me thought they were actually going to stop Caitlin Clark. What I thought they were going to be able to do is stop everybody else. And that just didn't matter. So that was, I feel like, where it went off the rails, and especially with Cesano. And then they didn't, for some reason, they couldn't score. Like that was the other issue was, I mean, Iowa is such a bad defensive team. You saw it. I mean, they gave up 100 points to LSU in a championship. Iowa's defense is horrendous. And so for them to hold South Carolina under 80 was shocking to me. I mean, it was such a poor offensive performance, regardless of the fouls. It was surprising to me to see them sort of collapse under pressure like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, 20 more field goal attempts. You got to make shots, but they should have also probably been at the free throw line a lot more as well, because they were getting hammered underneath the basket and they were just letting it go. And then it was not being officiated that way at the other end of the court.
No, I agree. Yeah, it was just a really, it was almost, I know, everybody watching on TV and everything was saying what a great game it was, but it didn't feel like a great game watching it. It felt like Caitlin was great and nothing else was particular. Like it wasn't South Carolina playing their best basketball and Iowa playing their best basketball. It was Caitlin Clark shooting the lights out and everybody else kind of running around. Because
South Carolina's best player was not allowed to be on the floor.
So it was kind of, it was a disappointing final to me to watch. Honestly, everyone was talking about, it's the greatest college game ever, and I didn't. It didn't. I don't know. In the arena, it didn't feel like that. Even from the Iowa perspective, I don't think it felt like that. It was one of the greatest performances from Caitlin. That was really the end of it for me.
So honestly, I've seen a lot of great games, a lot of great South Carolina women's games, but the greatest game I've ever seen live and in person was in 2017, and it was after South Carolina came back and beat Stanford when Mississippi State beat undefeated UConn in overtime. And Morgan Williams hit that shot. That game by far was a much better Final Four game than South Carolina, Iowa, simply because, you got Bree Beal going 1 for 9. You got South Carolina getting 20 more field goal attempts, and they can't make them. They're missing critical free throws. Even Aaliyah is missing free throws. Iowa, I thought, had an excellent game plan. I thought they made excellent adjustments at halftime because Zia Cook absolutely had the biggest mismatch. You could see it in the first 2 minutes. I was like, to the people sitting around me, there's no chance that little 24 is holding Zia Cook one-on-one. No chance. And she dominated her. And then the second half, instead of Iowa just playing a slumping man-to-man, they played a slumping box-in-one. And so every place Zia tried to drive the ball, she was driving into a double team, which created some very critical turnovers at critical junctures in the game. Even after South Carolina taking the lead, I think they had 2 or 3 turnovers in a row when they had a chance to stretch a lead. And instead Iowa, capitalizes and retakes the lead.
Yeah, and that was one of the real heartbreakers for me, was just how upset Zia was afterwards, because she played so well. Like, there was nothing else she could have done. They would have lost that game by 25 if Zia Cook was not playing in that game. I don't know that she came off the floor. She might have maybe for a couple minutes here and there, but she played well over 30 minutes, and I would venture it was pretty darn close to 40.
I think it was like 37 minutes.
She was just spectacular. And they needed that. And that's something she's been able to do so many times this year is, she's had her slumpy games, but every time that they needed somebody to put points on the board, Zia could do it. You look at that Georgia game where she had a career high because nobody else could buy a bucket. It was cool to see her have that moment, and I wish it had ended more celebratory of that, because it was such an impressive showing from her, and with 8 rebounds. She was on the boards that game and the Maryland game. I think she had 8. So that was, a big jump up for her too. And that really has not been her strength for much of the year.
Yeah. I thought she left it all on the floor. She played her heart out, and, to see the disappointment, and then Aaliyah go and have her cover up her face so the same thing does not happen to her that happened to Aaliyah in San Antonio when she missed the tip in. By the way, that ESPN showed over and over and over for the next year. This was not a group of bar fighters, not a group of street fighters, not a group of thugs or monkeys or any of the other derogatory names that they were called. In fact, quite the opposite. Not only were they 131-9, which will probably never be topped at South Carolina. Let's face it, we all hope it will be with the next freshman class, but probably not. just the class, the style, and the way they went about their business, the way they entrenched themselves in the community, and on and off the court, never did anything except shine and put a positive light on the program, on them, as a reflection from the great families from which they come from.
Yeah, I mean, it just, and the fact that Dawn felt she needed to defend them after that game was really heartbreaking. I think to watch it was heartbreaking, I mean, you could see in Dawn's face, in the way that she was speaking, just, the sort of degree of hurt that it was. And, a lot of the commentary online and whatnot was it's, being a sore loser and whatnot. And it didn't feel like that to me. It felt like a very genuine hurt. And maybe that's also because they're the same comments that she's made a lot this year after a lot of games that they've won. It's the same comments she made after they beat UConn, and Gino kind of, spoke about the way the team played in a similar way. And it was sad that was, what their final moment had to be was Dawn having to kind of defend them and defend the way that they played and their character, because again, I mean, it's funny just because I don't feel like they are a more physical team than anyone else in the SEC. They play just like LSU. They play just like Ole Miss. They play just like Mississippi State. That's the way that this league is, and it's not, South Carolina, never watching them was I like, wow, they're so like physical and tough. Because there are teams that you think that, like, there's nothing, and that's not a bad thing, but it specifically didn't feel necessarily even accurate about South Carolina as, a true statement of their play style. So it was a weird weekend in Dallas. It was not kind of the triumphant, finale that I think, any of the fans, the players, the coaches were hoping for that group.
All right, so let's face it. There's a racial component here.
Yeah.
Okay. Like Pat Summitt's teams, that's how they played. Okay. I've been to Pat Summitt practices. Okay. When they were on their run, in the midst of their big run. In fact, I love watching Pat Summitt's team practice more than Jerry Green's, who was the men's coach at the time. I'd just sneak over and find out when the women were practicing. They were tough. I don't remember anybody calling Pat Summitt's teams monkeys and thugs and street fighters, or let's take it to SEC football with Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. Okay, and those national championship teams and the programs they built. You don't hear those kind of remarks being made about them. You don't hear that being made about UConn men's basketball and Danny Hurley. And I mean, you just got to call it what it is. And two of the three reporters, I know who it was. Okay, I got a great source, and two of them work for the 4-letter network. Okay. And by the way, I will say neither is Holly Rowe, who is about the only class act that they got that covers women's basketball outside of Ryan Rucco. Okay. A lot of those others, they have an agenda, but it's bad, man, when Rebecca Lobo is defending Aaliyah Boston in the game and talking about the refs, right? Because she's all UConn all the time, and she should be, and she's probably still got PTSD from her dream team experience under Tara Vanderveer as well. So, but it's sad for the sport. I thought what was good for the sport was the national commentary on how pathetic the officiating is, because I've been saying it for years. And finally, they put it on ABC, even though it's in the middle of the afternoon. It was still between 10 and 14 million viewers, which is the most watched women's game ever. And you saw the national pundits, from Bill Simmons to Colin Cowherd to everybody else, just talking about how god awful the officiating is in that sport, and they've got to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it was disappointing, especially for those Final Four games specifically. And again, it's not even so much that the calls were bad, which they were, but it's not even so much that, it's that they were different. You know, they were not consistent with the way that things were called during the regular season. I mean, South Carolina played Big East refs. They played Pac-12 refs. They played, non-conference teams that were not called the way that those two games were called specifically. I mean, it's, again, I think basketball officiating is hard. It's never going to be right most of the time. I think it's always going to be bad to some degree. I think that's just sort of the reality of officiating and of, the speed of basketball and how subjective a lot of the calls are in basketball. But I mean, when it gets to the level that it was during the Final Four, it was disappointing. And it was disappointing that even, when you look at the national championship, that took away from LSU and from what they did, because they played a phenomenal game against Iowa. I mean, Jasmine Carson having the game of her life. Oh,
yeah, that was the X factor, right?
And all we're talking about is how the officials ruined it. Yeah, I mean, it was sad that we didn't get to sort of celebrate that game more, because that was a great game. Like, I mean, and
she was the MVP to me, because you couldn't game plan for her going 7 for 7 and 5 for 5 from 3 in the first half. Iowa was not game planning for that.
No,
that's not like game planning for Aaliyah Boston or Zia Cook, right?
Or even for Angel Reese and Alexis Morris. I mean, you've got those two on your scouting report. You've got LaDasia Williams on your scouting report. You don't have this bench player who's averaged 0 points during the tournament coming in and scoring 20 in the first half. So that was, I mean, again, I wish we had talked more about it instead of having to talk about how Caitlin Clark got a technical for no reason. It was, I hope it gets better. I hope this makes somebody do something about it. I don't know what, but
they couldn't call the same calls on her for pushing off all tournament long. And in particular, if you're going to call Aaliyah Boston for touch fouls, why aren't you calling Caitlin Clark for, I tried to be nice on Twitter and I said, hey, Caitlin Clark uses her left arm to create space a lot, which is a nice way of saying, hey, she's pushing off a lot. Yeah. And she gets away with it every time. And if you're going to call those fouls on her and Camila Cardoso in the fourth quarter of that game, there's a drive from the baseline, okay? And so you're allowed to have the principle of verticality in the restricted area when the ball is on the baseline. She jumped straight up. Straight up, and blocked the shot. The offensive player initiated contact into her. She jumped straight up, which was her right, okay, in the principle of verticality. And Iowa walks to the free throw line for 2 shots. And then it's still, after all of that, Aaliyah Boston not being a factor, not making shots, missing free throws, turning it over. You force Iowa, who's up 1 or 2, into an end of the shot clock heave 3 that bricks off the backboard. Iowa's only had 2 live ball rebounds the entire game, and the ball just lands right in an Iowa player's arms, and you had to foul. And to their credit, they went 14 for 14, or maybe better from the free throw line. Yeah. And so you had to foul, and Caitlin Clark, I think she got all 6 of her free throws were in the last 2 minutes when you had to foul. So, Boston's on the floor, or you don't give up the Cesano uncontested layups. It really doesn't matter that she has 35, which is about what you thought she would have. She's not shooting 6 free throws because you have to foul. And I thought that was like another magnifying glass on Bree Beal, because why are you allowing her to catch the ball every time? Which she did catch the ball every time.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of the problem, was Bree also wasn't matched up on her very much. They really were putting the point guards on Caitlin for some reason, which didn't make sense.
Fletcher got killed.
And Raven did too. I mean, they weren't ready, and neither of them are strong enough one-on-one defenders to handle a player like that, who is, literally famous for being unguardable. You cannot not have your best guard on Caitlin Clark if your goal is to try to limit her. If that's not the goal, then you need to succeed at limiting everyone else. And they didn't do either. And it felt like they couldn't commit to a strategy. They couldn't commit to either, we're going to shut down Clark, or we're going to let Clark go and shut down everyone else. They were kind of stuck in this weird in-between, and everybody hurt them.
All right, so the freshies are gone. 7 departures in total. 10 roster spots are set for next year. 8 McDonald's All-Americans, and it most certainly Chloe Kitts, had she not graduated early, would have made it 9 McDonald's All-Americans on the roster. Certainly there will be transfer portal additions. If you're just tuning in tonight on the Garnet and Black Town Hall, our VIP Zoom call, I will be revealing the 5 major transfer portal targets. Who on the current roster are you looking forward to, and who do you think are some of the players that will make the biggest jump going into next season?
Yeah, I think Ashlyn Watkins is a big one that I have my eye on. I've had my eye on all year. I just think her ceiling is so high. She's very similar to LA in that I think she has physical attributes that are very unique. She's very physically mature for her age. She's big. She's strong. She is built like a college player, at coming into college.
Yeah.
And that's something that's only going to continue to grow in that strength program that has been so good over the last few years. I think she is one too who got a lot of playing time in some very key moments, got a lot of playing time alongside Aaliyah, who I think is going to be sort of ready mentally to take on that load of starting and that load of sort of being the go-to. I love what Ashlyn does. I love her athleticism. I think she's going to be really fun to watch next year and beyond. Raven obviously is the big one who's going to, I think it's going to be her team, her and Camilla's team next year. Dawn described Raven as the future after that Iowa game. And I think that's 100% true. I mean, she showed this year, she is ready to have this be her team and her program. And I would not be surprised at all to see her in the all SEC first team, All-American type conversations next year, with the way that she played this year, not confident coming off of an injury, essentially her freshman college season. She did not look like a freshman out there very often. and I expect that number to go down next year. And then, I mean, Bree Hall is one that I'm really excited about right now too, especially after the tournament. I thought she was phenomenal. I mean, throughout the tournament, she was the only one who could hit a three in a lot of those games. That's, you know, a shot that I know she's worked on. I think if she keeps working on, it'll get a lot more consistent, because she has it when it's there. And you know, I just love Bree as a defender. I think she will kind of be able to fill that Bree Beal role. So yeah, that's kind of my list right now.
All right,
There we go, we're back.
I have no idea. That is the sting of Wi-Fi, of the age of technology. And so where we left off, I think it was Breezy Hall you were talking about after Raven. I agree. And
Yes.
Look, I'm not a Hall of Fame coach, but sitting there, and hindsight's 2020. And look, I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm prejudiced. I love Breezy Hall and LA, and I thought LA played that first half with guts. And
LA was the only player on that team that hung with Caitlin Clark the whole time. She was the only one defensively who could hang.
And so why didn't she play more in the second half? Why didn't Breezy Hall play more? I mean, look, when you're 131-8 with a group of players, I get it. You've stuck with it. You've come from double digits down against top 5 teams multiple times with that lineup to win. But at Stanford, Breezy Hall was pretty critical. You know, LA has been pretty critical at times, particularly last year when Destiny Henderson went out. I thought with the way it was going for Bree Beal on both ends, and with Kara Fletcher, quite frankly, not being able to stay in front of Clark at all, I thought, you know, and coaches have a feel for it, but I thought South Carolina lost every bit of momentum they had going in at halftime in the first 4 minutes of the third quarter because Kara Fletcher and Saxton were on the floor instead of Raven and Breezy Hall or LA. And I thought if you had LA and Breezy on the floor, with Boston Cook and Beal. I thought you might could have just picked up where you left off, and LA only played like the last 2.5 minutes of the third quarter, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people were saying, South Carolina got out coached. And I don't know that that's true, because I don't know that Iowa did anything that particularly required coaching. I mean, Caitlin Clark went out and scored 40 points. That wasn't coaching. But I think they outcoached themselves, honestly. They overthought everything. It felt like they were like, oh, it would be too obvious of a matchup to, put Zaya on Caitlin. So we're going to put Kiera and Raven on Caitlin to, give them a different look. But at some point, you come back to the Marcus Satterfield advice of put your best players on the floor, put your players who are playing the best on the floor, and play them against the other team's best players. I mean, at some point that has to be the strategy. And I think they overthought it. I think they outcoached themselves more than anything Iowa did.
I agree. I just thought it was a lack of defensive execution and then not making shots, which I've complained about the number of missed layups all year long. In most of the games, when it has been a close game, it's because South Carolina's been 50% or even a little under 50% from point blank range.
Yeah.
So back to the future. So for me, I'm definitely with you. But Sanaya Fagan, for me, and Chloe Kitts, who I think she came in for a reason, and it was to get ready for next year when look, she's a UConn type offensively skilled player. She can stretch the floor. She can go off the dribble. She can shoot it from three. But I just got to say, somehow, somewhere outside of Sanaya Fagan, depending on what happens in the transfer portal, Malaysia Fulwiley, Dawn Staley has not recruited a dynamic perimeter player of her caliber since she's been at South Carolina. Tiffany Mitchell's the only one that comes close, and she was coming off knee injuries just like LA. She had been a top 5 prospect early in her career. And then they played her at point guard her freshman year. And so she had to transition. Dawn now likes to make point guards coming in play off the ball. I don't know if you saw the McDonald's game.
I sure did.
She scored 11 points in 2 minutes, and two of those were on a tip in, okay, at 5'7" or 5'8". And let's not mention the Steph Curry step back bombs from Caitlin Clark range.
Yeah. I mean, she is a player where you see some of her highlights, and I don't know how she wasn't a higher rated prospect. I know it's a size thing, I mean, she's so little.
But she is bigger than 5'6", though. I mean, she's like everybody says now, a legitimate 5'8".
Yeah.
But I don't care. She's bigger than Destiny Henderson.
And that's one of those things where she just her handle, her touch on the ball is really, really special. The speed that she plays with is really, really special. I mean, her and Raven on the floor together is not a duo that I want to play against if I do not have a sprinter on my team. I mean, they're going to be fun. They're going to be really, really fun. She is one I'm super excited to watch. I mean, I have only seen her in highlights, but I love her from what I have seen. I think she's going to be an immediate impact type of player.
I agree. Now, I do expect South Carolina to add a couple of established scorers from the transfer portal. Again, tune in to Garnet and Black Town Hall tonight for that. But, I mean, Cardoso was a walking double-double the last half of the season, it seemed like. And, I'm with you. Like, Raven she's special. And full Wiley, Dawn Staley's already referred to her as generational, and Sanaya Fagan as the most talented post player on the team, including Aaliyah Boston.
Yeah.
And so I don't think anybody's going to feel sorry for South Carolina, but I think they're going to be kind of under the radar. Everybody's already talking about Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers for the national championship. I'm not sold either team can get back.
And we're somehow not talking about LSU, who returns almost everyone and has a very good shot to pick up at least
Haley
one of
Van
Ashley
Lith.
Owusu and Haley Van Lith in the transfer portal. So,
I mean, Owusu, that really doesn't concern me that much. I think she's a defensive liability.
yeah.
Haley Van Lith had a whopping 1 field goal attempt in the first half of the national semifinals last year against South Carolina. But I like her. More on her maybe a little later, although I think she's going to LSU because her runner-up, her final two was Louisville and Baylor, and that was when Kim was at Baylor. And I think she knows she can come in and run the show and have a chance to play for a national championship coach.
Yeah, and some were saying, I know she's from Washington, and I know Jeff Walls had said she's hopefully maybe looking to get closer to home. So I wouldn't be surprised to see her end up somewhere in the Pac-12 either.
Could
Washington
be.
or Oregon, somewhere out there. So it'll be interesting. I mean, there's some names in there right now that are, I mean, Justine Passat from Tennessee is in there as of today, and that's a really interesting name for
who from Tennessee?
Justine Passat, former McDonald's All-American in the 22 class. She was their only 22 signee. I believe she's 6'4". She's pretty big. Has some of that. You know,
that just tells me Tennessee's hitting more transfer portal. Like, I think she realizes she's got to do it. I think Dawn Staley will be selective, but they've got plenty of room. You got 15 spots. I think 2 or 3 portal additions for South Carolina. And if they get the right 2 or 3, they may be the favorite again, quite frankly. Right now, nobody's talking about them. It's UConn, it's Iowa, it's LSU. And that may be good because the last time South Carolina started outside of the top 5 in the season poll was 2019 when the freshies came in. And I think they went 32-1 and were the number 1 overall seed before the prohibitive favorite to win the championship before the NCAA tournament got canceled. So more to come, and a lot of talent is on campus and will be on campus in a couple of months in Columbia, South Carolina. Emily, I can't thank you enough for all your contributions and for being here, and look forward to talking to you about the Garnet and Black Spring game, which comes up on Saturday.
Yeah, pleasure as always, Keith. I'll see y'all at Willie B in a couple of days.
Should be interesting for sure. I got a feeling the second half is going to be the Lenore Sellers show. Just a hot take.
I would like to see it. I would not be upset by that at all.
All right, Emily, have a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Sounds good. See you, Keith.
All right, and so that was Emily Adams from the Greenville News, and thanks to her and Collyn Taylor and to all of you, even though we kind of lost you for a couple of minutes, for hanging in on another great Gamecock Pod Live. I'll be back tonight for the Garnet and Black Town Hall. Until then, go Gamecocks. God bless. Let's check one more time on Tank Booker. I don't think he has announced yet, so we're still tracking that. So until next Wednesday and until tonight, for all the VIP patrons, this is Keith Alsep saying God bless and go Gamecocks, and thanks for tuning in to Gamecock Pod Live. I am out of here.